The vicar was asking if anyone present knew just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, and Ottilie Marchwood stared at the white lilies on the altar rail and forced herself to breathe. 20 seconds of silence. That was all tradition required. 20 seconds, and then her life would at last be settled. Beside her, Lord Quentin Ravenshaw stood very straight in his wedding coat, his gloved hand resting lightly over hers. He was a good man, a kind man, a man who had courted her across an entire autumn and never once asked why she flinched when someone mentioned the Duke of Westmere in her hearing. A man who deserved rather better than a bride who had not been able to meet her own eyes in the looking-glass this morning. The vicar drew breath to continue. The chapel doors crashed open behind them. Every head in the pews turned at once. A sound, half gasp and half scandalized whisper, rippled from the front of the nave to the back. Ottilie did not turn. She had known, the instant the wood struck the stone, whose voice would come next. I object. 3 years of teaching herself not to think of him. 3 years of taking the long road through any village where a black Ashcombe carriage might pass. 3 years of swallowing his name before it could cross her lips in sleep. And here, on the one day she had believed herself safe from him, he had walked back into her life as if he had never, for a single hour, stopped belonging in it. Ottilie turned. Evander Ashcombe, Duke of Westmere, stood in the open doorway with the winter rain streaking his greatcoat and something colder than anger in his gray eyes. He had not removed his hat. He had not surrendered his gloves to the waiting verger. He had come as he was, muddy boots and storm-wet hair, and he was walking down the aisle of her wedding as though the congregation did not exist. The vicar recovered first. "Your Grace, this is most irregular. I must ask you to." I said I object. His voice filled the chapel the way it had always filled rooms, low and certain and assured of itself. Ottilie felt the old familiar traitor kick of her heart against her ribs and hated him for it, and hated herself a great deal more. Quentin's hand tightened around hers. He was not a small man. He stood nearly as tall as Evander, and she could feel the slow, careful shift of his weight as he prepared himself for what any gentleman would prepare himself for when a stranger walked into his wedding and laid claim to his bride. Ravenshaw. Evander did not look away from her. A word with Miss Marchwood. "The lady is no longer Miss Marchwood," Quentin said evenly. "She is a widow, as I am sure you are aware. And in any case, Your Grace, you have interrupted a private ceremony. Nothing about this ceremony is private." Evander had reached the altar steps. He stopped there, one hand resting on the carved rail, the muscles of his jaw drawn tight as a bowstring. "There are 47 guests, and half the county in the pews. I want them all to hear me. Evander." His name came out of her before she could stop it. It was the first time she had spoken it aloud in 3 years, and the sound of it in her own voice was so strange she almost did not recognize it. His eyes moved to her face, and she saw the shock of hearing his name pass through him like a blow. For one brief moment, he did not look like a duke at all. He looked like the young man who had stood with her in the orchard at Marchwood House 4 summers before, asking her if she would have him. Asking her, without flourish, with all his great and terrible composure, cracking open for her alone. Then the moment passed. The Duke returned. His eyes hardened. "I have ridden through the night," he said. "From London, from the archive at Doctors' Commons, and from the office of my family's solicitor, and from a very long conversation with a gentleman named Mr. Arden of Thornbury Wells, who was kind enough at last to show me his parish register." He reached into his coat and drew out a slim leather folio. "I would advise you, Ravenshaw, to send your guests home. There will be no wedding today." The congregation did not need to be sent home. Half of them were already half out of their pews. Ottilie's knees went cold and then hot. The folio in his hand, the parish register at Thornbury Wells, the quiet, dreadful mathematics of 3 years. "What is that?" Quentin asked sharply. "Proof," Evander said, "that Miss Marchwood cannot marry you today because she is already someone else's wife." The whole chapel made a single sound, not quite a gasp, and not quite a cry. "My wife, in fact," Evander said, "and she has been for the past 3 years." Quentin's hand went slack around hers. The warmth of him, the promised comfort, the ordinary and decent future she had prayed for these 3 long winters, all of it slipped away in the space of a single sentence. "That is a lie," Quentin said, but he had let go of her. Mr. Arden will attest to the date. Evander laid the folio on the altar rail. His movements were the movements of a man who had been rehearsing this particular afternoon for a very long time. The 11th of June, 1823, Gretna Green, Miss Ottilie Harriet Marchwood and Lord Evander John Ashcombe. Witnessed, countersigned by the sheriff. Registered. Registered, Quentin repeated, as though the word were in a foreign tongue. Registered, Evander said, which means that whatever Miss Marchwood may have believed herself to be these past 3 years, she has been, legally and without any dispute, the Duchess of Westmere. Ottilie's throat had closed entirely. The vicar was turning the pages of his prayer book as if it might contain a particular instruction for this particular Wednesday. The guests had risen to their feet without seeming to realize they had done it. And Ottilie, who had not dared look at Evander's face since he named the date, looked at him now. He was already looking at her. He had not stopped. "Tell him it isn't true," she whispered. It was not an argument. It was a plea. "Ottilie," Evander said, and there was something in his voice that was not anger, and not triumph, and not any of the emotions a man ought properly to have brought into a chapel to reclaim a runaway wife. There was only a terrible, patient exhaustion. You know that it is. The folio on the altar rail waited between them like an open grave. Quentin stepped back from her. "Ottilie," his voice was very careful now. "Is this true?" She could have lied. 3 years of practice had made her exceedingly good at it. She opened her mouth to lie, and could not. He had ridden through the night. He had torn a parish register out of a country vicar. He had walked down her aisle in his dirty boots and laid the truth on her altar like a knife. And the worst of it was the treacherous relief that moved through her when she understood, against every wish of her heart, that he was here. "Yes," she whispered. "It is true." Behind her, behind Quentin, behind the astonished congregation, the rain kept falling. And in the open doorway, Evander Ashcombe, the husband she had spent 3 years teaching herself not to love, spoke softly, as if the chapel had emptied, and they too were the only people left in the world. "Come with me," he said. "We have a great deal to settle, you and I." The side vestry was a cold little room behind the altar, hung with the smell of old incense and damp wool. The vicar had fled to calm the congregation. Lord Quentin Ravenshaw stood against the far wall, with his arms crossed, and his face gone white beneath his dark hair. Evander stood by the door, Ottilie against the window, and between the 3 of them, the leather folio sat on the small oak table, like a sleeping animal no one wished to wake. Quentin spoke first. "Then our engagement is at an end." He did not phrase it as a question. It was the voice of a man packing away his pride while the room watched. "I will inform my people. There will be a statement to the county. The news can be controlled." "Quentin," Ottilie said. "No." He raised one hand without looking at her. "Do not." "I am not angry with you, Ottilie. A man cannot be angry with a woman for being already married. But I am not yet composed, and I would rather not say things I cannot take back. Forgive me." He bowed to her. with the complete and perfect manners of a man who had decided to put her out of his heart within the next half hour, and meant to do so with dignity. It was very nearly worse than if he had shouted. He turned to Evander. "Westmere, if the lady is indeed your wife, I surrender all claim. But I warn you, if you have come here to play the injured husband and then ride off again and leave her to the gossips, I shall come for you myself." "I have no intention of leaving her to the gossips," Evander said. "See that you do not." Quentin bowed once more to Ottilie, very deeply, and then he left the vestry and pulled the door shut behind him. Ottilie was alone with her husband for the first time in 3 years and 1 month. She did not turn from the window. "How did you find the register?" she asked. Her voice was steadier than she had expected. The steadiness itself frightened her. "Mr. Arden was bribed once to forget it had ever been written," Evander said. "He was not bribed enough. A better offer persuaded him to remember." "A better offer from you?" "Yes. Then you have been looking." A pause. "I stopped looking 2 years ago," he said. "For the last year, I have been trying very hard not to look. I heard about the engagement only a fortnight ago." "And who told you?" "That is not important." She turned. "It is to me." He did not answer. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw that he did know and would not say, and that the person who had told him was someone neither of them wished to discuss yet. "You have humiliated Quentin," she said. "Quentin is alive and has his estate and will marry handsomely before the season is out. A duke's widow would have been a greater scandal for him later than a duke's wife is for him today. I did not come here to humiliate the man. I came because I could not allow you to commit bigamy without at least offering you the courtesy of an annulment first." The word hung in the small, cold room between them. Annulment. He had come to offer her an annulment. She understood, horribly, what the interruption had been for. It had not been rescue. It had been a final piece of clean bookkeeping. A duke closing the last open ledger of his life. He had not come for her. He had come to untie her so that neither of them would ever again have to think of the other. Something inside her, a foolish small animal she had believed long dead, made a soft, dreadful sound of collapse. "I see," she said. Whatever was on her face, he saw it. His expression did not change, but his hand, resting against the doorframe, tightened until the knuckles whitened. "Ottilie, you need not explain yourself, Your Grace." She could hear her own voice, as if from a great distance. "If you will tell me what papers require my signature, I shall sign them today, and you may be on your way. It is not so simple. It is very simple. You wish to be free. I shall not object." "Ottilie," he said again, and this time there was something under the name. "Look at me." She looked. His face was pale under the travel stains. He had not slept. There were shadows under his eyes that she remembered from the week his father had died. "The law," he said, "does not permit a duke of the realm to annul a marriage quietly. Not one registered, not one witnessed. There will be a hearing before a bishop's commission. There will be a period of joint residence under my roof, during which inquiries will be conducted, for the simple reason that no peer's wife may be set aside without the Lord Chancellor's examination. You are my wife. Until the courts are satisfied, you need not be. That will take some weeks, perhaps months." "Weeks," she said, "perhaps months. Under your roof, under Westmere's roof, you are the Duchess. Until the annulment is granted, the law requires you to live as such. I have already written to my solicitors. The carriage is waiting at the gate." Understanding struck her like cold water. He had come for her. He had come to set her free. And in the process, through the ironclad machinery of the law he himself served, He had bound her to his house for as many months as it took to pry her loose from it. "No," she whispered. "I am very sorry, Ottilia," Evander said. "We have no choice." The words struck her harder than they ought to have done. She had heard them in her own mouth once before, whispered in another vestry 3 years ago. She had wept herself into believing them. Now, as she looked at the set of his shoulders and the leather folio on the table, she understood with a slow certainty what she had perhaps always understood. There had, even then, been a choice. She had simply made the wrong one. "Very well, Your Grace," she said. "Lead on." Westmere Hall rose out of the November twilight like a great gray animal asleep on the hills. Ottilie had not set foot inside it since the summer before her elopement, when Evander had shown her every room and told her which of them, one day, would be hers. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hensley, met them at the great door, with a face so carefully blank it must have cost her a fortnight's practice. "Your Grace," she said to Evander, and then, after the tiniest pause that told Ottilie the staff had been warned twice, "Your Grace," to Ottilie herself. Ottilie did not reply. Evander's hand hovered at the small of her back without ever touching her. "The rose room has been prepared for the Duchess. Mrs. Hensley will see that any requirements are met. There will be a cold supper laid in the small library at 9. I shall not impose my company on you further this evening." It was perfectly polite. It was perfectly arranged. And it was the coldest thing he had said to her since the chapel. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. He did not look at her as she climbed the stairs. She felt the absence of his eyes on her back like a small, clean wound. The rose room had been her intended bedchamber. 3 years ago he had walked her through it at sunset and teased her, gently, about the pink silk upon the walls, and asked whether she would like it changed. She had said no. She had said it was perfect. The pink silk was still on the walls. Nothing at all had been changed. She sat very carefully on the edge of the bed, and she understood, with a clarity that made her ill, that he had never meant any of these rooms to be for any other woman. He had left them exactly as they had been, because he could not bear to alter them. And now he was preparing to have her, at last, undressed and unwrapped inside them, for the single purpose of arranging her legal removal from them forever. It was unkind of him. So deeply unkind that she had to press her hand hard against her mouth to keep from making any sound. She did not go down to the cold supper. The knock came at 9:30. She knew who it was without asking. "Come in," she said, because refusing him the courtesy in his own house felt like the one petty cruelty she could not afford. Evander opened the door, but did not cross the threshold. He had washed and changed. His hair was still damp. He looked like a man who had lost a great quantity of weight in a short time and was only now discovering where it had gone. "You haven't eaten." "I am not hungry." "You haven't eaten for the best part of 2 days," I asked the housekeeper. "Your housekeeper is very efficient." "Ottilie, do not use my name," she said. "Not in this room, not here." His hand on the doorframe closed slowly into a fist and then opened again. "Very well," he said. "Your Grace, I came to say only this. Whatever you imagine I feel about your time at Wren Cottage, I do not ask you to speak of it. Your years with Mr. Brooke are your own." She had been holding herself together through sheer will alone. At the mention of Finian's name in this room, with this man, the last strain of it snapped. "Do not speak of him," she said. "Do not say his name in this house." "Then perhaps you will understand," Evander said, "why I should prefer that you do not say mine and yours." It landed exactly where he had meant it to land. She stood. He was a good man. He was kinder to me in 3 years than you managed in the whole of our engagement. He asked me nothing. He demanded nothing. He let me be a woman in ruin. and he never once made me feel ruined for it. And I watched him die last February, and I held his hand while he went. So yes, Your Grace, I shall not say his name in your house. But if you imagine my silence is anything other than the last favor I can still do him, then you are a fool." Evander's face, which had been carefully still, went perfectly white. He said nothing. He bowed. Not deeply, only the smallest acknowledgement. Then he stepped back and pulled the door shut, and the soft click of the latch was louder in her ears than any slam. Otillie stood in the middle of the rose room in the pink silk that had been waiting 3 years to be hers, and she listened to his footsteps go away down the corridor. When the last of them had faded, she sank slowly to her knees on the Turkish rug and did not cry. She had wanted to. She had expected to. But something in her was too tired, and too old, and too afraid of the months ahead to permit her the simple relief of tears. She remained there a long while. At some point, perhaps an hour later, perhaps 2, she lifted her head. The lamp on the writing desk had burnt low. On the corner of the desk, placed there while she had been on her knees and had not even heard the door open, lay a small silver tray. Upon it were a plate of cold game pie, a glass of watered wine, and a sealed note in Evander's hand. She rose unsteadily and crossed to the desk and broke the seal. The note contained 2 lines in his sharp, narrow script. "You have not eaten. You need not answer this, nor the door, nor me. Only eat. E." Otillie stood at the desk with the little piece of paper between her fingers, and for the first time since the chapel doors had crashed open, she felt something hot and terrible climb the inside of her throat. She did not cry then either, but it was a very near thing. Morning at Westmere Hall came quiet and gray through the heavy curtains. Otillie had not slept. She had eaten a little of the game pie, forced to it by the 2 short lines of Evander's note, but the food had tasted of nothing. She had set the tray outside her door at dawn, and returned to sit at the writing desk with her forehead against the cold wood, and that was how she remained until the house at last began to move below her. Mrs. Hensley sent a maid with a pitcher of warm water and a plain morning gown of dove-gray wool that fit her, astonishingly, almost to the seam. Someone had measured her wedding gown in the chapel and ridden out for a seamstress before sunrise. The thoroughness of it unnerved her. It suggested a household that had been waiting for her arrival a very long while, without knowing quite when it would come. She dressed. She did her own hair. She went down. The breakfast room was empty. The Duke, the maid informed her, had been in his study since first light, and had asked not to be disturbed. There was toast laid out, and cold ham, and a pot of tea kept hot upon a spirit lamp. Otillie sat at the great table alone, and drank 3 cups of tea, and ate nothing. After breakfast, she walked. She meant only to put one foot in front of the other, until the movement stilled the thing that was rattling loose inside her chest. She walked the long gallery, where the portraits of 4 generations of Ashcombe dukes looked down with identical gray Ashcombe eyes. She walked the north corridor, where the tall windows looked out across the wet park and the bare oaks. She walked past the door of the little morning room, where 3 summers ago, Evander's father had taken her hand and told her she was the first young woman his son had ever brought home, and that he hoped she understood what that meant. She did not go into that room. At the end of the corridor, she came to the library, and here she stopped. The door was ajar. She knew, the way one knows a thing in a house that has once been promised to you, that the library was empty. Evander would be in the study on the other side of the house. The housekeeper would be in the butler's pantry. The library at this hour would belong to no one at all. She went in. It was a long room, walled with books from floor to ceiling, with 2 great bay windows and a desk of dark, polished walnut set at an angle between them. A fire had been laid, but not yet lit. The air smelled of leather bindings and old paper, and very faintly, of the cedar oil Evander had always used to keep his shelves against worm. On the desk lay an open ledger, and beside it a small locked cabinet of Moroccan leather. She should not have crossed to the desk, but she did. The ledger was an ordinary estate ledger, open at the current quarter. What caught her eye was a small bundle of letters, bound in a plain black ribbon, sitting upon the corner of the blotter. The topmost letter was directed in her own hand, 3 years old. She lifted the bundle before she had thought to stop herself. There were perhaps 15 letters. The paper had yellowed at the edges. The creases were worn soft with much handling. Every one of them had been addressed to him in her girlhood hand, upon the stationery she had used at Marchwood House before she had fled it. Letters she had written him during their engagement. He had kept them. He had tied them with a black ribbon, and he had left them out upon his desk, where any servant might see them, as if he had been reading them in the hours before riding south to Thornbury Wells, and had not yet found the heart to put them back away. Ottilie laid the bundle down with hands that would not quite obey her. "I did tell you the library would be cold." She turned. Evander stood in the doorway. He had not come in. He was simply leaning one shoulder against the jamb, watching her, with the expression of a man who had walked a very long way without any shoes, and had only just begun to feel it. "I did not mean to intrude," she said. "It is your library." "It is not." "It was to have been." She could not answer that. The black ribbon lay between them on the blotter, like an accusation neither of them had made aloud. He straightened. "A rider has come up the drive. Lord Quentin Ravenshaw has presented himself at the front door." Her stomach dropped. "He is asking to speak with you," Evander said. "He says the matter concerns your safety, and it cannot wait, and he will not leave until he has seen you. I have told Mrs. Hensley to show him into the green drawing room. The choice, of course, is yours. My safety." His words, not mine. "He said goodbye to me yesterday. He has evidently reconsidered." Something in Evander's voice had gone perfectly flat. His hand on the doorframe was, once again, a fist. "I shall see him," she said. "Of course. I would ask your grace that you be present." That surprised him. A flicker of something, not quite relief, passed across his face before the Duke returned to cover it. "Are you certain? If he has come to tell me that I am in danger inside this house, I should prefer that you hear him say it. And answer for yourself." She lifted her chin. "Unless you would rather, I heard him alone." "No," Evander said. "I would not." They walked together down the long corridor. They did not touch. They did not speak. But when they reached the door, Evander paused, with his hand upon the handle, and did not yet open it. Ottilie. She did not tell him, this time, not to use her name. "Whatever he says," Evander said, "I will not lie to you. About anything. About any part of it. If he tells you I have done a thing, and I have done it, I shall say so. Remember that, if you remember nothing else of today." She looked at him. For one unguarded instant, his gray eyes were not a duke's eyes at all, but the eyes of the young man in the orchard, who had promised her, 4 summers ago, that he would never in his life tell her a thing that was not true. Then he opened the door, and Lord Quentin Ravenshaw rose from the chair by the window with his hat in his hand and a folded paper tucked in his glove. The room went very still around the 3 of them. "Forgive the intrusion," Quentin said, "but there is something, Your Grace, that you both need to hear." Quentin's paper was a letter. Not, as Ottilie first assumed, a letter from him. It was a letter from her brother. "Sir Percival sent this to me 11 days ago," Quentin said. He had not sat down again. He stood in the center of the green drawing room with his hat still in his hand, looking from her to Evander and back, as if he were uncertain which of them he was meant to address. It arrived by messenger the morning of the day I rode out to prepare for the wedding. I did not open it at once. I had a great many other matters in hand. I opened it yesterday evening at my inn, after I had left you, because I could not sleep. Quentin, Ottilie said, please read it. He held out the paper. She did not take it. She looked at Evander. Evander did not move. He was watching Quentin with an expression she could not read, but the line of his jaw had gone very hard. I will read it, Evander said, if you wish. No. She took the letter. She knew Percival's hand. She knew the curve of his capital letters, and the narrow, pinched way he wrote his small ones, and the particular ink of his particular school. She recognized the letter before she had read a word of it, and something in her chest went cold. The letter was not long, perhaps 6 sentences. It was, in essence, a congratulation to Quentin upon his forthcoming marriage, and an instruction. The instruction was that once the wedding had taken place, Percival would call upon Quentin at Ravenshaw Park to discuss, as he put it, the settlement agreed between us 3 years ago. He reminded Quentin, in very polite words, that the timely performance of the wedding was the condition upon which the settlement depended. He signed himself, her affectionate brother. Ottilie read the letter twice. Her hand was shaking by the time she reached the signature the second time. A settlement, she said. 3 years ago, Quentin said. What settlement? Quentin did not answer at once. He looked at Evander, and Evander looked back at him, and a thing passed between the two men that Ottilie, even at her sharpest, could not quite interpret. I had best explain, Quentin said slowly, that I first met your brother, Ottilie, in the August of the summer you disappeared. He called upon me at Ravenshaw. He had heard that I was friendly with your family. He was in some financial difficulty. He told me that his sister had fallen into certain embarrassments, and that an honorable match, some few years hence, might repair a very great deal. He proposed that, when the time came, if I were still unmarried, I should consider you. He proposed. Ottilie's voice was thin. To you. For me. He did. In August of that summer. Yes. I fled in September. I am aware. The drawing room was very silent. Ottilie did not look at Evander. If she had looked at him, she thought, she would not have been able to go on standing upright. You did not tell me, she said to Quentin. I did not know the full circumstances of your leaving until I read these words. I accepted your brother's suggestion at the time because I was fond of you as a girl, and I imagined that you, in time, would return to society and be glad of an honorable offer. When you came home last April, a widow, I was glad to find you willing. I believed the settlement your brother spoke of was merely the usual arrangement of a dowry, nothing more. It did not occur to me, until I read this letter, that the agreement pre-dated your disappearance. And you have brought me this letter, Ottilie said, because I have begun to believe, Quentin said, that your brother may have arranged your disappearance deliberately. The room tilted sideways. Sit down, Ottilie. Evander was beside her before she quite registered that he had moved, one hand under her elbow, the other at her back. Sit. She sat. Evander did not remove his hand. He remained beside her, half kneeling against the arm of the settee, his palm still at the small of her back, where no one in any drawing room in England would have been permitted to lay a hand. Quentin observed this without remark. There was a small, tired courtesy in the way he turned to study the window, as if he had understood, perhaps before either of them had quite understood it, how the matter stood between the other two people in the room. I have no proof yet, Quentin said to the glass. I have only the letter, and the date of it, and my own memory of a conversation. I cannot say what he did, but I thought it only just, Your Grace, that you should both know of it before I pursued the matter further. I thought it particularly just that Miss Marchwood, I beg your pardon, that the Duchess, should know. Ottilie could not speak. Evander spoke. "Ravenshaw," he said, "I owe you an apology." Quentin shook his head. "You owe me nothing, Your Grace. You rode here yesterday to marry a woman in good faith. You rode here again today to bring her a letter that will have cost you no small measure of comfort to deliver. I was uncivil to you in the chapel. I was uncivil to you in the vestry. I ask your pardon. You need not." Quentin set his hat upon the table. "I am, as it turns out, a very great deal less heartbroken than I had expected. That itself tells me something about what I felt, and didn't feel. You will forgive me if I do not dwell upon the point. I should like to go home." "Go home," Evander said, "and rest. We shall send word to you. You will hear from me in a matter of days." "And Ravenshaw?" "Yes, if you will permit me. The next time I speak of you, it shall be to speak well." Quentin inclined his head, a small bow, not ironic, not cold. Then he turned to Ottilie and bowed more deeply, and he said, with the simple and composed manner of a man who had thought a great deal during one short ride through the rain, "I hope, Your Grace, that you find peace here. And I hope that whatever your brother did to you, you will permit the Duke to help you set it right. Good day." He left. The door closed behind him, and the soft snick of the latch was the loudest sound in the room. Ottilie turned her face toward Evander. She did not know what her face was doing. She only knew that the breath had gone out of her, and that her hands were ice, and that Evander, still half kneeling beside her, had not yet moved his hand from her back. His thumb had, at some point, stroked once along her spine, a small, helpless, unconscious motion, before he had caught himself and gone still again. "Evander," she whispered, "I know. I left you because Percival told me. I know. He said he would ruin you. He said he had." "Ottilie," his voice was rough, "I know. I understood it the moment Ravenshaw began to speak. I should have understood it 3 years ago. You will be very angry with me later for that, and I shall deserve all of it. But tonight you will eat something, and you will sleep, and you will not think of this another moment. I cannot sleep. Then I shall sit by your door until you do." He did not say it sentimentally. He said it the way a duke gives an order to a housekeeper about a fire being laid. She did not argue. She could not have argued. He rose and helped her to her feet, and he walked her up the great staircase, and at the door of the rose room, he bowed and didn't come in. But when she closed the door and leaned her forehead against it and waited, she heard, a moment later, the soft scrape of a chair being drawn into the corridor and set against the wall. He did, in fact, sit by her door. She lay upon the great canopied bed in the pink silk room, in her day gown with her shoes still on, and for the first time in 3 years and 1 month, she slept as though nothing bad in the world could reach her. Her last thought was that she had not once asked him to do it, and he had done it anyway. She did not sleep long. When she woke, the fire in the rose room had burnt down to embers, and the little gilt clock on the mantel told her it was 2 in the morning. She did not know, for a moment, where she was. The pink silk, the canopy, the rain still faintly drumming at the lead-paned window. Then she remembered, in one cold wave, and remembered also, more slowly, the chair in the corridor. She got up. She did not trouble to wake the maid asleep in the dressing room. She wrapped herself in the heavy Indian shawl that had been laid at the foot of the bed, crossed the chamber in her stockinged feet, and opened her door perhaps a hand's width. Evander was asleep. He had taken off his coat. He sat in the high-backed chair with his head propped against the carved wood, and his long legs stretched out before him at an angle that could not possibly have been comfortable. A book lay upon his knee, open, face down. Beside the chair, on the floor, sat a single candle burnt almost to the socket. He had sat there 4 hours. Ottilie stood in her doorway and looked at him. She looked at him, she thought afterwards, for longer than she had any right to. She had not been permitted to look at him in 3 years. She had learned, during the first winter at Wren Cottage, how to stop herself from assembling his face in her memory at night. She had trained herself out of it, the way one trains a dog out of a bad habit. And yet here he was, sleeping awkwardly in a corridor, because she had said that she could not sleep. There was a faint gray streak at his temple that had not been there 3 years ago. It was not very wide. It was the mark of perhaps one very bad night, or perhaps 100 ordinary ones. His mouth, in sleep, was softer than it was awake. It always had been. It was, she remembered with a small, sharp ache, the particular mouth of the young man she had once chosen to marry. Not the Duke's mouth. Not the mouth that had spoken the word annulment in the vestry of St. Agnes. This was the mouth that had kissed her once, exactly once, in the orchard at Marchwood House 4 summers before, when she had whispered yes. She closed her eyes. She went back inside. She drew a blanket from the foot of the bed, a soft woven thing of gray wool. She came out again into the corridor. She knelt beside his chair. She laid the blanket across his lap and his chest with as much care as she had ever laid anything in her life. He did not wake. She remained kneeling there a moment longer. She had meant only to return to her bed. She did not return to her bed. Instead, and she would never afterwards be able to explain it, she lifted her hand, very slowly, and she laid the backs of her fingers against his jaw, just at the place where he had always been unable to shave cleanly on the left. The stubble there was rough beneath her knuckles. He was warm. The pulse at the side of his throat was steady, a little slower than she remembered from the orchard. A sleeping pulse. His eyes opened. He did not start. He did not move. He did not take his gaze from her face. For perhaps 3 heartbeats, he simply looked at her, in the low candlelight, from a distance of no more than 6 inches, and she understood that he had not been asleep for some while, and had been pretending in order not to disturb her. "Ottilie," he said. It was not quite a whisper. She took her hand away. She did not do so quickly. She let it come away from his jaw slowly, as if the leaving of it were a thing she was choosing deliberately, piece by piece, and she wanted him to feel every part of the choice. "I brought you a blanket," she said. Her own voice was not entirely steady. "Thank you. You will catch a chill out here. I will not. You will. I have slept in worse places than a corridor in my own house, Duchess." The word slipped from him without his noticing it. Duchess. It was not a title, the way he said it. It was a private name, a word that belonged to no one else in England. She felt it land in her, somewhere low and terrible. She rose from her knees. She took a single step back. "I shall go in." "Ottilie, do not." "I will not." He did not try to rise. "I shall sit here until morning, as I said." "But Ottilie, in the morning, after you have eaten, we shall have to speak about your brother, and about the other matter. The other matter. The matter of us." She could not answer. "I will not press you tonight," he said. "But I will not, I find, go on pretending for the Lord Chancellor's benefit that I am indifferent to you when I am sitting in a corridor at 2 in the morning because you could not sleep. We shall have to decide, you and I, what this annulment is truly to be, whether it is a freeing or whether it is a thing neither of us has ever wanted." His voice had gone rough at the end. Ottilie stood in the narrow strip of candlelight between the corridor and her doorway, and she understood, with the clarity that comes only in the small hours, that he had just told her, without saying it, that he loved her still. She took the last step back into the rose room. She closed the door. She stood with her forehead pressed against the wood, and listened, and on the other side of the door, she heard Evander Ashcombe let out very softly a single long breath. The breath of a man who had been holding it a long while and had finally been given permission to set it down. In the morning, there was frost upon the windows and a note upon her breakfast tray. 3 lines in the same sharp, narrow script. The study at 10, if you will. There are papers I must show you before we speak further. E. Ottilie dressed herself in a plain gown of dark blue merino wool and went down at 10 precisely. The study was smaller and warmer than she had expected. 2 tall windows looked south across the bare park. A fire of seasoned oak burned low and steady in the hearth. Evander stood at the desk with his back to the door, one hand braced upon the blotter, the other pressed against his mouth. He did not turn when she entered. He had heard her. "Close the door, if you will," he said. She closed it. "Sit, please." She sat. He turned. He looked as though he had not slept since she had left him in the corridor. There were papers spread across the desk in 3 small, neat piles, and a 4th, larger and tied with the black ribbon she had seen the previous afternoon, placed to the side. "These," he said, and laid his hand upon the first pile, "are the letters I sent to Wren Cottage in the first year after you left. 9 of them. They were never opened. They were returned to me, each of them, by the village postmaster at Thornbury Wells, with a note in what I now suspect was not Mr. Brooks' hand, informing me that the recipient did not wish to receive further correspondence and that any further letters would be burnt unread." Ottilie's mouth went dry. "These," he said, laying his hand on the second pile, "are the replies I drafted to your brother's condolences, in which he informed me, very sympathetically, that you had been seen quite publicly in the company of Mr. Brooke some weeks before your disappearance, and that there had been talk. I did not send them, but I kept them." She said nothing. "These," he said, laying his hand on the third pile, "are documents I obtained from a private inquiry agent named Bramble, whom I engaged in the March of the following year. I did not look at any of it, Ottilie. I paid him, and I took the folio, and I locked it in that cabinet, and I have not opened it in 2.5 years. I was afraid that if I read what he had found, I would be unable to let you go, and I had already promised myself that I would. I believed I owed you that much. Evander, last night after you closed your door, I went downstairs and I opened it." He did not meet her eyes. "Your brother," he said, "in the August of 1823, settled a debt of £4,000 to a gentleman named Lorimer in London by the transfer of a promissory note drawn upon the estate of Lord Quentin Ravenshaw. The note was dated the 14th of August. 2 days later, your brother called upon Ravenshaw and suggested to him an eventual match with his sister." Her fingers had gone cold. "Your brother," Evander continued, "was not in financial difficulty because of gambling, though he told you he was. He was in difficulty because he had been bribed, the previous winter, to obtain a particular document from my father's private cabinet, and had failed to deliver it when his associate was arrested. The document was a codicil to my father's will concerning the settlement of a debt owed by a distant cousin, a debt my father had forgiven in private and had never published. The codicil was of no very great importance in itself, but the existence of the theft and of your brother's role in it would have been enough to have him hanged. The man to whom he owed the £4,000 was the same man who held the evidence. Hanged, she whispered. Hanged. The fire shifted. A log fell. Neither of them moved. He told me, she said, her voice flat and far away, that if I did not go, he would tell Lorimer to send the papers to the magistrate. He said your father's name would be put to the newspapers together with the theft. He said your family would be ruined. He said the dukedom would be tainted beyond saving, and you would never marry. He said it would destroy you. Yes. He said it was the only way. Yes. He said, she said, and now her voice was breaking, that if I loved you, I would go, and that if I wrote you a letter telling you I had gone with someone else, you would hate me and recover and be free. Yes, Evander said. I believed him. I know you did. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. Finian, she said, knew. Not all of it, but enough. Percival had promised him £20 a year for his silence and his protection. Finian took the money the first year and refused it after. He was a good man, Evander. He loved me. He never touched me. He slept in the parlor for 3 years and called me Mrs. Brooke before the neighbors and Miss Ottilie when we were alone. When he was dying, he made me promise I would never tell anyone what he had given up for me. I have kept that promise. I am breaking it now, only to you. Evander crossed the room. He knelt beside her chair, and he didn't touch her, and he said, very low, Ottilie, look at me. She looked. You saved me, he said, from a ruin that was never mine to begin with. You gave up 3 years of your life for a codicil. You gave up your name and your standing, and any hope of a child that was yours, and you watched a good man die for a piece of paper my father had already forgiven in private and would have laughed to see in a newspaper. And I let you do it. I believed the worst of you, Ottilie, because it was easier than believing I had failed you. He took her hand from her face, very gently, and held it in both of his. Forgive me, he said. There is nothing to forgive. There is everything to forgive. I should have come for you. I should have gone to Wren Cottage with pistols and a carriage and broken every window of that house until you came out. I should have put your brother through a wall. I should have ridden to every county in England until I found you. I told myself I was respecting your choice. I was being a coward. And while I was being a coward, Ottilie, you were living 3 winters in a cold cottage in a village you did not know, holding the hand of a dying man and hating yourself for my sake. She could not speak. She did not need to. He had laid his forehead against the back of her hand, as if the weight of what he was saying could not be held up by a neck alone. She felt his breath against her knuckles, warm and uneven. She felt the small tremor of him. She felt, at last, the full grief of it rise up and crest and break against the wall she had built. She began, quite simply, to cry. She cried for the letters he had sent that she had never received. She cried for Finian, who had died in a cold upstairs room last February, with her hand in his, whispering that she was not to be sorry. She cried for the pink silk in the rose room that had waited 3 years for her. She cried for the girl she had been in the orchard, and for the man this one had become in her absence, and for every night each of them had lain awake in their separate houses, mourning the other for nothing. Evander lifted his head. He did not ask. He rose, and he drew her up with him, and he put his arms around her, and he held her. He held her the way a man holds a thing he has believed lost, the way he has rehearsed 100 times in his head and never once permitted himself in the daylight. His hand cradled the back of her head. His mouth was against her hair. I loved you every day, he said. Every day, Ottilie. I have not been indifferent for 1 hour. She did not answer in words. She lifted her face. She kissed him. It was nothing like the kiss in the orchard 4 summers before. That had been a boy and a girl beneath a pear tree, trembling and half afraid. This was a man and a woman who had each, in the private silences of 3 winters, loved the memory of the other so thoroughly that loving the real one was now almost too much to bear. He made a sound against her mouth that was not a word. His hands came up into her hair. The pins gave. The careful coil of it slipped down her back. He gathered it, as he had used to gather it, in one fist, and he kissed her, as if he had been given permission he had been waiting years to ask for. They did not leave the study. The fire burned down to ash. The gray winter light shifted across the carpet and lay in a long, pale square upon the Persian runner at their feet. A maid came twice to the door, and twice heard low voices within, and went away without knocking. At some point, much later, the clocks struck 3. Afterwards, she lay against his shoulder upon the long leather settee beside the cold fire, his coat drawn over both of them like a blanket, and she felt him turn his face into her hair and breathe her in. "Ottilie," he said at last. I am not permitting the annulment." She lifted her head. No. I shall write to the solicitors this evening. I shall write to the Lord Chancellor in the morning. You are my wife. You have been my wife 3 years. I am done pretending otherwise." She looked at him a long time. "Very well," she said. He closed his eyes. She watched the small relaxation go through him, shoulder and jaw and brow, in that order. The way she remembered it had used to go through him when she had laid her hand on his chest at the orchard gate and said yes. They slept a little, there on the leather settee under his coat. The knock upon the door, when it came, was not soft. It was very hard indeed, and it was followed by the voice of Mrs. Hensley, grim and urgent. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. Sir Percival Marchwood has just ridden into the courtyard. He is demanding to see his sister. He says he has a magistrate with him." Ottilie sat up so abruptly that the world turned sideways. "A magistrate," she said. "A magistrate," Evander repeated. He was already on his feet. He had straightened his waistcoat. He was retrieving his cravat from the arm of the settee with the same efficient motion with which he might have taken up a pair of gloves. "Mrs. Hensley, show them to the library. Not the drawing room. Lay out tea. Delay them 10 minutes if you can. Tell them the Duchess is dressing." "The Duchess," Mrs. Hensley said, on the other side of the door, and there was the smallest possible note of satisfaction in the housekeeper's voice. "Very good, Your Grace." Her footsteps went quickly away. Evander turned. He looked at her. "You will not see him alone," he said. "Not in this house. Not in any house. You will not answer him without me in the room. Evander, if he has brought a magistrate, he has brought him for a purpose. I do not yet know what. But I know your brother, and I know the purpose will not be good. I want you upstairs in 5 minutes, in the plainest thing you have, with Mrs. Hensley beside you. You will come down the stairs behind me and stop upon the 3rd step from the bottom and not move until I say so. Is that clear?" "Yes. Do you need my help?" "No. Go." She went. She went up the great staircase, with her hair coming loose about her shoulders, and her heart beating very hard, and a curious cold clarity running in her veins. She reached her room. She unpinned the remainder of her hair and twisted it, and pinned it again. She changed her crushed morning gown for a severe black wool, the mourning she had kept for Finian and had not yet set aside, and she thought, as she fastened the last of the little jet buttons at her wrist, that black was perhaps exactly the color to meet her brother in. Mrs. Hensley was waiting in the corridor. Together, without speaking, they went down. Evander was already in the entrance hall. He had put on his own coat. He did not look at her directly, but he knew to the inch where she was upon the stairs, and he gave her the smallest possible nod, and turned, and led the way to the library. She stopped, as he had told her to, 3 steps from the bottom. Percival was standing by the fire. He was a thin, elegant man of 34, a little taller than her, with their mother's narrow mouth and their father's weak chin. He had always had a beautiful coat. He had one now. Beside him, in the green leather chair, sat a gentleman in sober gray, older, grave, with very white hair cut very short. The magistrate, then. "Ottilie," Percival said, and he came toward her with his hands out, his face assembled into the most wounded and affectionate expression she had ever seen him wear. "My dear, what on earth has happened? I have had the most extraordinary letter from Ravenshaw. I came at once. She did not take his hands. Percival," she said, "what are you doing in this house? I live here. You live." His face stopped smiling. He looked past her, at Evander, at the magistrate. "Your Grace." "Forgive me. I have come in some haste. I have been informed that my sister was prevented from marrying Lord Quentin Ravenshaw yesterday upon a claim of prior marriage. I confess I am unfamiliar with the particulars. I have brought Mr. Halbrook of the county bench with me in the hope that we might clarify the legal position. My sister is, of course, a widow. Any claim upon her prior to her marriage to the late Mr. Brooke would, I should have thought, have lapsed upon that marriage. Except, Evander said, that there was no marriage. I beg your pardon. There was no marriage between your sister and Mr. Finian Brooke. The parish register of Thornbury Wells does not contain any such entry. The banns were not called. The license was never obtained. Mr. Brooke and your sister lived beneath the same roof for 3 years. They did not marry. She was not free to." "She was," Percival said sharply, "widowed only last February. Mr. Brooke died last February. He was never your sister's husband. I am her husband. I have been, without interruption, since the 11th of June, 1823. The register at Gretna Green will attest to it. Mr. Holbrook, you are welcome to examine the documents. They are here." The magistrate rose. He cleared his throat. He went to the desk where Evander had already laid out, in a small, precise row, 3 documents: the marriage register, a sworn statement from Mr. Arden, and a letter from Evander's solicitor confirming the legal position. He read them in silence for perhaps 3 minutes. "Sir Percival," the magistrate said, "the marriage appears to be in order." "Impossible." "It appears," Mr. Halbrook said firmly, "to be entirely in order." "Then the marriage must be set aside," Percival said. He was beginning to look unwell, on grounds of fraud, on grounds that my sister was, at the time, underage, on grounds that— "Your sister," Evander said, "was 22. Your sister wasn't under your guardianship. She required no consent from you. And you know this, Sir Percival, because you yourself witnessed her majority at Marchwood House on her 21st birthday, in the presence of my father, and signed the book as a witness that she had come of age and taken possession of her mother's settlement." Percival opened his mouth. Percival closed it. Evander did not raise his voice. "I have opened the bramble folio," he said. Something in Percival's face changed. It happened very quickly. It was not the face Ottilie had seen in her brother across the dining room at Marchwood House. It was not even the face she had seen in him 3 years ago, when he had come to her bedchamber with the letter from Lorimer and told her what she must do. It was a face she had never seen on him, stripped and white and blank, like a door slammed shut on a room she had never been permitted to enter. "Ah," Percival said. "Yes," Evander said. "I see. I rather thought you might." Mr. Halbrook, who had been following this exchange with the careful attention of a man who suspects he has not been given the whole story, said slowly, "Your Grace, if there is a further matter—" "There is a further matter," Evander said. "It is one I should prefer to lay before you at a later date, in your own chambers, with my solicitor present. I should be grateful if you would call upon me at 3 on Friday. Sir Percival will, of course, be present." "Of course," Mr. Holbrook said. "Friday," Percival repeated. Friday, Evander said. And you will understand, Percival, that until Friday, you are not to call upon my wife, nor write to her, nor send any message by any hand. You are not to leave the county. I should find it difficult otherwise to continue to regard our connection as a family matter. Percival's gaze slid past him to Ottilie upon the stairs. Ottilie. She did not answer. Ottilie, he said, surely you do not. She came down the 3 remaining stairs. She walked across the hall. She stopped at the library door. She looked her brother in the face for the first time in 3 years and 1 month. Get out of this house, she said. Her voice was very soft. Ottilie. Get out, she said, of this house. And if you come near me again, Percival, before Friday, or after it, or ever, I shall tell Mr. Holbrook everything I know. I shall tell him about Lorimer. I shall tell him about the codicil. I shall tell him about the £20 a year to Finney and Brooke. I shall tell him what you said to me in my bedroom at Marchwood House on the 9th of September, 1823. Now go. Percival went. He did not bow. He did not take his gloves from the side table. He walked out of the library past her, and past Evander, and past Mr. Holbrook, and past the open front door, and into the courtyard. And he did not look back. The magistrate left shortly afterwards, very civilly. And Ottilie, alone in the entrance hall of Westmere with her husband, leaned against the cold stone of the wall and began to laugh, very softly, because if she had not laughed, she would have fallen down. Evander caught her before she fell. The dark moment came, as dark moments tend to, at 4:15 o'clock the next afternoon, and it came in the shape of a letter. Ottilie was in the morning room. She was writing, with a firmness of purpose she had not felt in years, to Miss Prudence Halloway, her old friend, explaining that she was going to remain at Westmere, that the annulment was not to proceed, that she begged Prudence to come and see her as soon as she could. She was halfway down the 2nd page when Mrs. Hensley came in. Forgive me, Your Grace. A letter has arrived. It is marked urgent. It is from the Dowager Duchess. Ottilie set down her pen. The Dowager. Yes, Your Grace. She had met Lady Mirabelle Ashcombe exactly twice, both times in the summer before her disappearance. The Dowager had received her courteously, had asked the expected questions, had kissed her on the cheek at parting, and had said nothing of consequence. Ottilie had understood, in the way any young woman understands these things, that the Dowager had not been against the match, but had not been for it either. She had not heard from her in 3 years. She broke the seal. The letter was not long. It was in the upright, careful hand of an elderly gentlewoman who wrote rarely and with effort. My dear Miss Marchwood, I have this morning had from my son the extraordinary news that you are alive and at Westmere, and that the events of 3 years ago were not as he believed them to be. I write to you, not to him, because there is a matter he does not know. The arrangement by which you were permitted to leave in September of 1823 was not made by your brother alone. It was made with my knowledge. I was informed of the circumstances by Sir Percival upon the morning of the 8th of September. I was given to understand that the alternative was the public disgrace of my late husband and the ruin of my son's inheritance. I consented to your departure. I provided a portion of the sum that was paid to Mr. Brooke. I wrote the letter that was sent to the postmaster at Thornbury Wells, requesting that any correspondence from my son should be returned unopened. I did these things because I believed they would preserve my family, and I believed also, to my shame, that a young woman of your station would recover more readily from such a displacement than my son would recover from the ruin of his house. I have been wrong, my dear, in every particular. I have been wrong for 3 years. I do not ask you to forgive me. I ask only that you permit me to tell my son the truth myself, at a time of your choosing, so that he may hear it from the mouth that owes him the telling. Mirabel Ashcombe. Ottilie set the letter down upon the writing table. She did not move for a very long time. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her mind was perfectly clear. She was not crying. She was not strictly angry. She was simply sitting in the morning room with the early dusk coming down over the park, and a letter on the table in which her husband's mother, whom she had met twice, confessed to having paid £20 a year to keep her in exile. £20 a year to a kind countryman who had slept in the parlor of a cold cottage and called her Mrs. Brooke in front of the neighbors and never once touched her. She understood, slowly, that this was the end of her ability to remain in this house. She could in time forgive her brother. She had never believed him to be anything other than what he was. She could even forgive herself. She had been 22 years old. She had been frightened. She could not remain in a house where the woman who was now her mother-in-law had helped to pay for her ruin. She could not sit across a table from Lady Mirabel at Christmas. She could not bring a child, if there were ever to be one, into that woman's arms. She stood up. She folded the letter 3 times. She placed it in the pocket of her gown. She went upstairs to the rose room. She rang for the maid. She asked, in a voice that did not shake, for her trunk to be fetched down from the attic and a traveling bag to be brought to her at once. She asked for a plain dinner to be sent up to her room at 6. She asked that the Duke be informed she had a headache and would not be down for supper. The maid went away wide-eyed. Ottilie sat upon the edge of the great canopied bed, and she set about making, for the second time in her life, and in the very same circumstances, the wrong decision. She would leave in the morning. She would go to Prudence. She would explain nothing. She would write to Evander a letter that was neither cruel nor cold, only a letter that told him he must speak with his mother alone, and that she needed time. It was, she understood, exactly the sort of letter she had written 3 years ago. She did not care. She could not be in any house, however loved, where she had been bought. When the knock came at her door at 7, it was not the maid with her supper tray. It was Evander. "Ottilie," he said through the wood, "my mother has written to you. I have just had her letter. May I come in?" She closed her eyes. "Please," he said. "Please, Ottilie, do not do this again." She opened the door. She did not mean to. She had meant to tell him through the wood that she was unwell and would speak to him in the morning, and in the morning she would have been gone. But the please had done it. It was not a word he used. It was not a word he had ever, in 4 years of acquaintance, used to her, twice in one breath. And she understood, with her hand upon the latch, that if she did not open the door now, she would spend the rest of her life remembering the sound of it. She opened the door. He was standing in the corridor in his shirt sleeves, a letter crushed in his fist. His face was gray. He had plainly come upstairs the instant the thing had been handed to him. He saw her face. He saw the traveling bag upon the floor behind her. He saw the folded letter in her hand. He did not speak for a moment. He simply looked at the bag, and at her, and at the bag again, as if the 3 facts together were an arithmetic he could not solve. "No," he said, very softly. "Evander." "No, I must go to Prudence for a month. I will write. I will." "No." He stepped across the threshold. He closed the door behind him. He crossed the room in 4 strides, past the bag, past the pink silk, past the little writing desk, and he took her hands in both of his, and he said, not quietly at all, "I will not let you leave this house again, Ottilie. I will not. You may go where you wish within it. You may choose any room you like. You may lock me out of every corridor in the place if it gives you peace. But you are not leaving. You are not going to Prudence. You are not writing me a letter. You will tell me here, with your own mouth, what it is you need, and I will do it. And if I cannot do it, I will find the person who can. But you are not, Ottilie. You are not going to disappear again. I will not survive it twice. His voice broke upon the word, twice. She did not answer. He went on. My mother has written to you. I have read her letter. I did not have her permission to read it. She sent me my own copy, sealed. I opened yours, because Mrs. Hensley told me you had asked for your trunk, and I knew already before I had broken the seal what I would find. She has confessed to me, too. She has been confessing to me, Ottilie, in slow, careful pieces, for 2 days. She has wanted to come here herself. I have not permitted it. She is at the lower house, Ottilie. She has been there since the morning I rode for Thornberry Wells. She has been waiting. She has not slept. She is 63 years old, and she hasn't slept in 3 nights because she knows exactly what she did to you, and she cannot bear any longer to carry it. Ottilie's throat had closed. I do not say this to soften you toward her, Evander said. I do not ask you to forgive her. I do not ask you to see her. I would not blame you in the smallest degree if you never again crossed a threshold beneath which she stood. That is your choice. It is entirely yours. But I will not let you make the choice by climbing into a carriage at dawn and vanishing out of my life with a folded letter in your pocket. Because I cannot, Ottilie. I cannot. I cannot. I cannot. He was no longer the Duke. He was a man standing in a pink silk bedroom, holding a woman's hands and saying the same word 3 times, as though the 3rd time might be the one that made it carry. Ottilie pulled her hands from his. She did not step back. She lifted them, slowly, and she laid them upon either side of his face. His jaw was rough under her palms. His skin was hot. A muscle moved in his cheek, as if he were trying not to show her how much he was shaking. I was going to do it again, she said. I know. I was going to write you a letter. I know. I was going to leave you a note upon this pillow, Evander. I was going to walk out of this house. I know. I am not going to, she said, and it was very nearly a question. No, he said. You are not. Tell me I am not. You are not going to. Say my name. Ottilie. Again. Ottilie. She drew his face down to hers, pressed her forehead against his, and stood there a long while, with her hands at his temples and his hands at her waist, breathing. When she could speak, she said, I shall see your mother. Not tomorrow. Not this week. But I shall see her. She will tell me herself, to my face, and I shall decide what I wish to do with her after. I shall not promise forgiveness. I shall not promise anything. But I shall see her, because if I do not, I shall carry her into every room of this house for the rest of my life, and I have carried enough into enough rooms. I am done carrying, Evander. Yes, and you are not to read my letters. No, not any of them. Not ever. No. Not even if you are afraid, especially not then. Good. She kissed him. Not as she had kissed him in the study the day before. Not with the long grief of 3 years pouring out between them. This was the kiss of a woman who had just been on the brink of vanishing from her own life, and had chosen, instead, to stay. He lifted her off her feet, very briefly, and set her down again, and laughed once, very shakily, against her hair. Ottilie. Yes, I'm going to call Mrs. Hensley to send the trunk back to the attic. Yes. And I'm going to sit in the corridor chair tonight, whether you like it or not. You will not. I will. You will sleep in this bed tonight, Evander Ashcombe, or you will sleep in your own. But you will not spend one more night in a corridor in your own house, like a footman standing guard upon a lamb. I will not permit it. Something in his face went still, and then, slowly, something else went on still. The Duke left him. He was only, for a moment, a tall, tired man in his own house, being spoken to very firmly by his own wife. "Very well, Duchess," he said. Mrs. Hensley took the trunk back to the attic. The traveling bag was unpacked. A small bell was rung in the lower house, an hour away across the park, by a very old woman who had been waiting 3 days for any message, and the message was only that the Duchess would receive her at an hour of her own choosing, not yet fixed. The very old woman sat down and wept until the housekeeper of the dower house had to send for brandy. The next morning, the announcement was placed in 3 London papers. His Grace, the Duke of Westmere, wishes to make it publicly known that the Duchess of Westmere, formerly reported to have quitted society, has resumed her place at his side. The Duchess's name, having been the subject of unjust rumor these 3 years past, is to be defended by His Grace, with all such remedy as the law and his person shall afford. Any gentleman or publication maintaining the contrary shall hear from His Grace directly. It was the sort of notice that was, everyone agreed, quite without precedent. It was read aloud at every breakfast table in Mayfair. Sir Percival Marchwood was arrested at his club at 11:15 on Friday morning, upon the testimony of a man named Lorimer, who, it emerged, had made his own quiet arrangement with the Duke's solicitor 3 days before. Percival did not hang. The Duke, to Ottilie's private astonishment, had not wished him to. He had wished only that he should be stripped of the last of his creditworthiness and packed off to a small and unbeloved estate belonging to a cousin in Nova Scotia. This was arranged by Friday afternoon, and Lady Mirabel Ashcombe was received, formally, in the Long Gallery at Westmere, 3 weeks later, by the Duchess, who did not offer her a kiss upon the cheek, but did offer her a chair, and did call her, coldly and correctly, Mother. It was, Lady Mirabel wrote that night in her journal in a shaking hand, the most generous reception she had ever received in her life. Society, being society, had something to say about all of it. It said a great deal, in fact, and it said it for nearly 2 months. It said the Duke had lost his wits. It said the Duchess had bewitched him. It said the 3-year disappearance had been an elaborate scheme, or a fit of madness, or the result of a child, or the result of no child. It said that Sir Percival had been perfectly justified, and also that he was a monster. It said that Lord Quentin Ravenshaw had been shamefully treated, and also that he had behaved magnificently. It said, with particular energy, in the more confident sort of drawing room, that the Duke ought to have set the whole thing aside, and married the Honourable Miss Sybil Cranborne, who had been, everyone agreed, the most suitable match in England, and was now, everyone further agreed, the most wounded young lady in it. The Duke did not answer any of it. The Duchess did not answer any of it either. The Duchess, in fact, spent the first month after the announcement in the small library at Westmere, with a fire burning at her feet and a great quantity of estate correspondence upon her lap, learning the names of tenants and the ages of their children and the state of the Eastwood and the condition of the North Barley, because, she had informed her husband firmly, if she was to be the Duchess of the place, she was not going to be. So as a decoration, Evander did not argue with her. He brought her tea. He sat on the floor at the foot of her chair and read out the more alarming letters from London in a very bad imitation of the particular voices of their authors, until she laughed and told him to stop. He kissed her, often and inconveniently, in doorways and stable yards, and at the turn of the stair. He rode the park with her in the afternoons. He did not, even once, make her sleep in a room he did not share with her, and in the evenings, when the lamps were lit and the servants had gone to their own suppers, he would lay his head in her lap upon the small settee before the library fire, and she would run her fingers slowly through his hair, which had a little more gray at the temples each season, but was otherwise exactly the hair she had first put her hand into under a pear tree in her father's orchard. And he would say, very softly, "Ottilie," as if he were checking once more that she was there. She always said, "Yes." The world, losing interest after 9 weeks in the absence of any fresh scandal, turned to other matters. Lord Quentin Ravenshaw married, 4 months after the announcement, a Miss Josephine Carow of Sussex, a very sensible young woman of 26, with a fortune of her own and an excellent understanding of horses. He wrote the Duchess a quiet, gracious letter upon his engagement, and the Duchess wrote a quiet, gracious letter in return, and the Duke read both of them at his wife's request, and said that Ravenshaw was, on the whole, a better man than the Duke had deserved to meet, and that he hoped Miss Carow understood her luck. Miss Prudence Halloway came to stay for 3 weeks in the early spring, and was made godmother in advance of any child the Duchess might yet have, in a small private ceremony in the library, witnessed by the housekeeper and 2 footmen, and a slightly bewildered curate from the village. Prudence wept. The Duke, to his wife's very great astonishment, also wept, although he denied it afterwards with perfect composure, and blamed the smoke from the fire. Lady Mirabelle Ashcombe, who had expected to be exiled from Westmere for the remainder of her natural life, was instead invited to dine each Sunday. She came each Sunday, dressed in her best. She sat in the seat at the end of the table that the late Duke had used to sit in, and she was treated with a cool, precise, unfailing civility by her daughter-in-law that was not love and was not friendship, but was, week by week, a little less like a wound and a little more like a convalescence. Once, in the June of the following year, Ottilie asked her to come and look at the rose beds, and the 2 women walked together along the south terrace for an hour, not arm in arm, but side by side. And the Dowager, returning to the Dower House that evening, wrote in her journal only a single sentence. "Today she called me Mirabelle. It was enough. It was, for her, more than enough." And the cottage at Thornbury Wells, Wren Cottage, small and white, and set among the damson trees at the edge of the common, was bought by the estate a year after the announcement. It was not sold on. It wasn't let. It was kept exactly as it had been, with the thin blue curtains at the parlor window, and the old iron stove, and the 2 small graves behind the churchyard wall that held a man and a small clutch of his better days. Ottilie went there twice a year, once upon the anniversary of Finian's death, and once upon the anniversary of the September afternoon. He had first come to her in her father's garden, and offered, very awkwardly, to help her disappear. She went alone the first time. The second year, and every year after, Evander went with her. He stood at a small distance while she laid flowers upon the stone. He did not speak. He did not intrude. But when she turned from the grave, on the 3rd such visit, she found that he was weeping too, silently, with his hat in his hands, and she understood that he had, at long last, let himself know what the man at their feet had been to her, and to him, and to both of them together. He said that evening, riding home, "Ottilie, Mr. Brooke saved my wife's life. Yes, we shall not forget him. No, not ever. No, Evander, not ever." The Duke's gray gelding plodded quietly along the chalk lane in the early dusk, and the Duchess rode beside him upon a bay mare that had been his wedding gift, which he had bought 3 years before and kept in the stable in the meantime, because he had not, he said, been able to bring himself to sell it. And when they passed the turn of the lane, where the pear orchard of Marchwood House began, she reached across, without speaking, and took his hand. He held hers the rest of the way home. Their first child, a girl, was born in the autumn 3 years after the announcement. They named her Phinia. Lady Mirabelle wept at the christening. So did Mrs. Hensley. So, a little, did the Duke, but he blamed, as usual, the smoke. 5 years after the Duchess's return to Westmere, upon a grey November afternoon, very like the one upon which Evander Ashcombe had ridden through the doors of the chapel of St. Agnes, the Duke and Duchess stood together at the window of the small library, watching their daughter Phinia, now aged rather more than 2, chase a wooden hoop across the south lawn in the charge of an exceedingly patient nurse. It was not quite raining. It was not quite not raining. The grass was very green. Evander. Do you remember? Every day. I have not told you what I said to myself in the chapel at the moment the doors opened. No, I said, she told him, that it could not be him. It must not be him. Any other interruption in the world. A fire, a falling pew, a distant cousin with a grudge. Only please God, not him. He turned his head and looked at her. Why? Because, she said. I knew, the instant I heard the doors strike the wall, that if it was you, I would not be able to marry Quentin, that I had never been able to marry Quentin, that I had been lying to myself with a great deal of care for 4 months, and that one sound of your voice would undo all of it. And I was right. Ottilie. Yes, I am glad it was me. So am I. He drew her against him. She rested her head in the hollow just beneath his collarbone, where she had always fitted exactly, and she watched her daughter run in small, staggering circles around the nurse, laughing, with the wooden hoop wobbling at her side. They said, Evander said softly, that I found you at another man's altar. They did. They were wrong. She lifted her head. Were they? I did not find you at another man's altar, he said. I found you at my own, 3 years late, and I have not, Ottilie, let you go from it since, nor shall I, for however many years are granted us. She smiled. Slowly. For however many, she agreed. Outside, Phinia caught the wooden hoop at last, and held it up above her small, proud head, shouting for her mother to see. And Ottilie Ashcombe, Duchess of Westmere, once reported to have eloped with a commoner, once mourned in 3 counties, once reclaimed upon a winter afternoon from an altar that had not been hers, raised her hand to the glass and waved and was seen.